Okay. Use it.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Ralph Perfetto. I'm a member of Brooklyn for Peace, and more recently, a member of the Israel-Palestine Committee. And as such, I want to thank President Dr. Charlotte Phillips, our Chairman Tom Cox, and all of my fellow members of the committee for selecting me tonight to moderate this event. It's a very, very important event. If anybody who can't hear me, please raise your hand. So far, so good. Okay. How's that? I don't want to knock this down. Okay, we'll do this. How about that? Okay. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to our forum. It's entitled The Right to Boycott, BDS and Your Civil Liberties. I want to thank Melissa and the Brooklyn Commons for the use of this space. I also want to personally thank Emily Beck for all of her work in coordinating all of this. Thank you. You've heard this before, but I'm sure that it should be repeated at every meeting. Brooklyn for Peace has been working in Brooklyn since 1984. We are democratically, small d, democratically functioning, nonpartisan group. We are committed to eliminating war and the social injustice that are its cause. Through active education on international and domestic issues, please, baby. We empower our community and ourselves to be a productive force in securing a peaceful future for generations to come. A quick note, this event will be videotaped. If anyone has an issue with this, please let us know now. Does anyone have an issue? No hands raised, no issues. Let me make it easy. Thank you. It's very important to note that our co-sponsors are the following: ACLU out of New York, Arab-American Federation, Central Brooklyn DSA Anti-War Working Group, Code Pink, New York City, the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, Fort Greene Peace, the Jewish Voice for Peace, New York City, Jews Say No, Jews for Palestine Right of Return, Labor for Palestine, New York for Palestine, Park Slope Food Co-op members for BDS, Peace Action New York State, Peace Action Staten Island, Sami Down Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, Tree of Life Education Fund, USA Palestine Mental Health Network, Veterans for Peace, New York City, Chapter 34, and The World Can't Wait. At this time, see what happens when I prepare too much. At this time, I want to have our opening with Remi Kanazi. Remi is a poet and writer based in New York City. He is the author of the newly released collection of poetry, Before the Next Bomb Drops, Rising Up from Brooklyn to Palestine. He is also the author of Poetic Injustice, Writings on Resistance in Palestine, and the editor of Poets for Palestine. Remi has some copies of his latest book for sale here tonight, so be sure to check that out with him if you're interested. At this time, Remi.
Mic check. Okay, I'll do that. Can you hear me in the back? Woo! You're 11 feet away. Awesome. Okay. I want to thank the organizers for having me out. I want to thank all of the co-organizers. We have a pretty packed event tonight, so I'm just going to get right to it. I do a long intros. I'm not going to do that tonight. Raise your hand if you know much about Palestine. Sweet. Oh, okay, a lot of you. Raise your hand if you know about as much about Palestine as I know about cooking by watching Top Chef, which means not that much. Okay, I'm gonna start off with a piece about the Nakba, then I'm gonna do a piece on BDS, then anti-normalization. I feel like we'll get educated and then activated and then yeah. For folks that don't know, from 1947 to 1949, 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed. More than 500 villages were destroyed to make way for what became the State of Israel. As Palestinians, we call it the Nakba. In English, it translates to the word catastrophe. But it's important that when we talk about the Nakba, we don't relegate it to an experience in the past and erase the waves of ethnic cleansing that have taken place over the last 71 years, or the fact that 7 million plus Palestinian refugees can't return to their homes and lands. So as much when we're thinking about battling anti-BDS bills or even advocating for BDS, we want to be thinking about what we're advocating for, the right of return, ending apartheid, occupation, and having freedom for all people. So this first piece is called Refugee, and it's the story of a father who was a child at the time, and the story of his daughter who's living under direct military occupation and has never been back to where her father was ethnically cleansed from. I'll go slower than that intro. Worst case, I believe it's being recorded. If I'm like real soft, can you hear me? Okay. It's gonna be like Nakba versus the bar. So. She's never seen the sea. Sunlight imprinted on her father's skin. Waves crashing at his feet, smile tattooed underneath boyish grin. Snapping pictures with closing eyelids. Her father's face, flush on recollection, the same waves that had clenched like an angry jaw as his mother pushed him forward like a train car. Watched his neighbor drown, tears streaming, eyes connecting, screams muffled, as inhalation suffocated lungs, muscles, weary, skin, pruning. He was barely a boy, knowing he'd never return. His neighbor, an older man born in Akka, looked dapper at dinner parties, looked helpless that day. His body revolting against death, a pool intent on swallowing him, so many stroking to get on boats departing. Who'd have known? This gulf would have been their deathbed. She has been beaten, ID checked, body thrown to the ground, fists and feet pummeled, tender flesh, shoulder broken, heart too many times. Tear gas inscribed on her lungs, she wrote back on her breath that the canister's defeat is near. These fields are ours, she said to me. Before the Europeans and Brooklynites, before the swimming pools, army jeeps, and barbed wires, before the talks, roadmaps, and Swiss cheese plants, before declarations, rewrote history, those hills meant footprints, and that can't be erased. Like village massacres can't be erased. Like broken bones policies can't be erased. Like the screams ringing in her father's ears can't be erased. We are the boat returning to dock. We are the footprints on the northern trail. We are the iron coloring the soil. We cannot be erased.
Can you still hear?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Before I introduce speakers, I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge and honor that the land on which we gather tonight is seized and occupied territory the Lenape people. I call them the First Nations. They were not just people scattered here and there, but they were nations on this land. They stewarded this land for generations. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and ask that we all take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here today. Now, has Sumaya arrived yet? Okay. What? Okay. Wonderful. And she was standing right before me, so quietly. So, let me do the introduction again. I did some stuff at home. But anyway, Sumaya Awad is a Palestinian activist and a writer. She's dedicated to advocating for the rights of all Palestinians, immigrants and refugees. Sumaya has written and spoken widely on Palestine and refugee solidarity movements. So we are honored tonight to have her. Please come.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Yeah, this is working great. I'm going to do my best not to read, but it's Ramadan, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. Thanks, Remi. That was an amazing performance, and thanks to everyone who organized this, especially Emily. Really good job. I want to start by zooming out a little bit and taking a look at the world we live in today, the U.S., but also globally. Because in the last couple of weeks in particular, it's become increasingly clear that our basic rights are being eroded and curtailed day by day, and more. Basic rights like our right to choose what to do with our bodies, our right to mobility, our right to access education, health care, and I mean even in the United States, and our right to free speech, to freedom of speech. And I think the right to boycott fits into this perfectly. And it actually has a very long, rich, and powerful tradition, both globally but also in the United States, including examples that Remi mentioned in his performance, Montgomery bus boycotts, and of course, South Africa, apartheid South Africa. And it's precisely because of the rich history of boycotts and their power to exact change that Palestinians for decades, long before 2005 when the BDS movement was launched, have used boycotts as a means to pressure Israel, just as others have used boycotts to pressure other governments, other people, to hold them accountable, to hold any unjust regime or political figure accountable to the people that are being oppressed. And this is why Palestinians have used boycotts to hold Israel accountable for its violations of their own basic human rights. And it's this rich history of boycotts that led to the 2005 call for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. In the United States, Palestinians and Palestine activists have been targeted by both the government, by administrations, campus administrations, as well as by Zionist organizations and well-funded groups to ensure that their activism for Palestine, their voices are suppressed and are silenced, and that these people are isolated and sort of pushed outside of the social sphere, so that they can't get jobs, they can't be admitted into schools, so that they literally fear to raise their voice in support of an oppressed people. And I think one of the best examples of this is Canary Mission, right? A blacklist that listed students, the majority of them people of color, and intimidated them into silence. And of course, the Israeli government has also played a huge role in this. One Israeli minister was caught saying that there need to be, quote unquote, targeted civil eliminations of BDS leaders with the help of Israeli and US intelligence. So, I mean, one just obvious question that I think comes to my mind, but I assume comes to many people's minds, is why? Why is there such an attack on BDS in particular? Why is it that Canary Mission was launched when BDS began to spread in the United States? Why is it that any campus that launches a BDS campaign, all those students end up on Canary Mission within a couple of weeks? So why BDS? And my answer to this is that it's because it's a grassroots movement, a bottom-up movement calling for self-determination that was launched in Palestine by Palestinians calling out to the international community. Over 170 Palestinian institutions, unions, campuses, student groups, feminist groups that signed on calling for people to heed the call for BDS and to pressure Israel. And as a result, any government, right, any regime, any powerful organization, what it fears most is the confidence and the power of people at the bottom. Because the people at the bottom are the many, they have the power, and those on the top are few, right? And that is exactly what BDS is. And as it continues to grow, I don't know how many of you saw, but earlier on Monday, the commencement speaker, I'm at 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 to go.
Okay. The commencement speaker, Stephen Thrasher, he was speaking at the New York NYU's commencement address, and he openly and proudly said he supports the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, and that he supports Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace at NYU. For anyone in the Palestine movement, this has not happened in this way before. In the last 2 years, at an institution like NYU, you know, this is a very powerful institution in the heart of New York that has a very powerful role both here and in the Middle East with its campuses. And at the same time, we have someone like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are Congress members. And yes, of course, there are problems with Congress, and this is not going to lead us to liberation. But the fact that we have representatives like them openly talking about Palestine, openly talking about BDS, we have to recognize that this is a step forward, and one that is a direct result of the activism that's happening on campuses in the US. It's from the bottom, and it's coming up. And that's what we're seeing with Rashida, who is now planning to take a delegation, a congressional delegation to the occupied West Bank, something that's never happened before. And of course, there are more and more campuses divesting. The Presbyterian Church divested. This is a church with over 1 million members who voted to divest. And all of this is in response to what Palestinians have called for. And I think that's really key in all of this. This is what Palestinians have demanded of the outside world. And their demands are a very, very basic agenda for what should constitute the first step for any viable, lasting, sustainable solution, right? As Remi said, it's to treat Palestinians in Israel as equal citizens, to dismantle the apartheid wall and end the occupation, and to allow Palestinian refugees the right of return. This is an internationally recognized right. So, realizing we're already over time. Another really important part of the BDS movement is that it is an intersectional movement. It's an international and intersectional movement. And there's two reasons why it's intersectional, and I'm going to explain why that's very key to this. The first is that it's building on the legacy of other boycotts and the power of boycotts, like South Africa, like the Montgomery bus boycott, but many, many others. But the second is that because it's an inclusive and anti-racist movement, and it's anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's opposed to any form of racism and any form of oppression, it plays a very powerful role in connecting different struggles against oppression. And I think there's two that I want to highlight right now. The first is imperialism. BDS is very much rooted in the struggle against imperialism. I think this is very, very important to highlight, especially here in the US. The US is you know, it's one of the leading forces of global empire, and so we must understand BDS through the lens of anti-imperialism, just like we need to understand the Nakba, which Remi talked about, as a very key part of imperialism during the 1940s and until today. So the call for BDS, in its essence, is a call against Islamophobia and racism and imperialism. Israel uses Islamophobia, uses the rhetoric of the war on terror post 9/11, even before that, to rile up support and to be able to label all Palestinians as terrorists, right? Just as it labels here in the US Muslims or any activists in Black Lives Matter, indigenous activists fighting for their land, it's able to label them as terrorists and then get away with surveilling them, with imprisoning them, with robbing them of their basic rights, with opening things like Guantanamo Bay, and with continuing to sell or to buy weapons from Israel and to continue its $38 billion military aid package for Israel. Israel's the only country that's ever gotten such a large military aid package. And we live in a world, as I'm sure most of you know, where oppression against one group of people doesn't come in isolation. And as much as our leaders, as much as the different governments that exist, as much as capitalism wants us to think of all of the different forms of oppression as little separated dots, each isolated, each with their own movement to pressure them, they're all connected. Just like right now, the right wing that is growing globally is connected. Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Israel, Modi in India, who just won a second term this week. All of these people are connected, not only as individuals who share a similar ideology, but money and aid and strategy. After all, Israel exports all of its military strategies. It uses them on Palestinians, right? On Palestinians, it tests them. It tests its drones, it tests its guns, its tear gas canisters. Israeli universities, after all, what do? A huge part of what Israeli universities do is build technology and create military weapons that can then be exported to the world. So it's known that Modi in India uses Israeli weapons, Israeli strategy, Israeli militarism against the people in Kashmir. The same is with China, against Muslims right now, against Uyghurs. The same is with the US on the US-Mexico border. Elbit systems like Remi mentioned, but also tear gas canisters and guns and actual strategy. The NYPD, the LAPD, the Chicago PD are trained in Israel. And then they come here and they use these strategies against black and brown people. So there are all of these connections that exist. And what BDS allows us to do is to, one, highlight them. So when we're practicing BDS, we're actively engaging in a fight against police brutality here in the US, against the detention of refugees coming from Central America. When the US-Mexico border is heavily militarized and the sixth child, right, just died in detention under US watch, all of these strategies are coming from another place and they're trading them and there's this network. And so what BDS allows us to do is build that own network for ourselves, for our side, because it's an international movement that allows us to implement it however it fits best in our community. So in New York, that might mean going after the NYPD and its relationship with the Israeli Defense Forces, or in NYU, it's closing their campus in Tel Aviv, etc. I'm running out of time. I want to end by talking about the urgency of all of this. Because as I started, we're living in a world that's increasingly becoming scarier, and the right wing is growing, and as is the left, but at different paces. And right now in Palestine, things are getting worse. And this is one that I want to end with this contradiction. Right now in Palestine, things are getting much, much worse. Settlements in the occupied West Bank are increasing rapidly. Since Donald Trump, there have been 30,000 new settlement units that were approved for construction. The amount of racist hate crimes committed against Palestinians by illegal Jewish settlers living on occupied land have tripled just in the last year. Gaza is going to be uninhabitable before 2020, which is when the UN estimated it would be. Things are getting much, much worse. And at the same time, outside, the BDS movement is growing. And it's no coincidence that those two things are happening at once. And so I'm going to end by talking about why BDS is important for us here. Beyond the fact that there's people who are oppressed who are literally dying under the Israeli apartheid state. But it's important for us here too because it's no coincidence that at the same time that the US has increased its military budget and spending, it's also cut down on healthcare and education here. It's no coincidence that Israel is getting more and more aid and more weapons and having more of a market to export its technology to at the same time that teachers here are on strike because they have 50 students in a classroom and not enough money to live and to pay for their healthcare bills. These things are connected, and we really need to shine a light on these connections and talk about BDS within that. The right of return, which is one of the three demands of BDS, is also extremely important. It is actually at the heart of what makes BDS such a strategic and critical movement at the moment. Because right now the politics of refugees and migration are central in this political period, not just in the US, in South America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Europe in particular, and of course in the Middle East. And so when we fight for BDS, when we fight for Palestinian right of return, we need to at the same time be talking about the demand of the right of return for all refugees everywhere. And that's how we cut against the attempt by the US and others and Zionist organizations to isolate the different struggles, to say, why do you care about Palestine? Why don't you just focus on your own struggles here in the US? That no, they are connected, they are intricately connected, and we can't be free as Palestinians. We can't have our right of return till everyone gets their right of return, until we're able to live in a world where borders aren't separating us. Just like the capitalists, just like big companies and profit, they just flow over borders, like there's nothing there. We need to demand that for people. So I'll just end by saying at the heart of what BDS is, it's a call to put people over profit, just like we do in our other movements. And I think the next step, right now it's on college campuses, we have a labor movement that's growing in the United States. We need to get BDS into our workplaces, into our unions, into our community halls, and we need to spread it and we need to connect it to all of these other movements against oppression, from Me Too to climate change to immigration and beyond. Thank you.
First of all, I want to commend Sumaya for her courage in taking on a very powerful Canary Mission. It's a great thing to do. I admire it. Before I announce our next speaker, I'd just like to touch upon something that Sumaya talked about, the right to return. I have two personal friends who live in Manhattan. Thomas is German, and his wife refuses to be called Iranian. She calls herself Persian. Her name is Cleopatra. And what happened was Thomas's father was in the German parliament in the 1940s. He married a Jewish woman and realized that they weren't going to be safe. He left Germany, left his position, left Germany, and went to Argentina. Thomas was born in Argentina. In 1946, he and his wife and Thomas returned to Germany, where he assumed his position in the German parliament. So there were people in World War II, not only Germans, Italians. In fact, many Italians went to Palestine, and Japanese that didn't want to be involved in the war, and they went to other places. But when the war was over, they just came back. Why are the Palestinians refused the right to return? We should never forget that. Anyway, our next speaker, Nerdeen Kiswani, is the founder and chair of Within Our Lifetime, United for Palestine, a community-based Palestinian-led youth organization in New York City. She has a degree in international relations and human rights from CUNY, where she helped build multiple SJP chapters that will be at CUNY Law in the fall. Just recently, Nerdeen led a wonderful rally in Bay Ridge for Palestinians. And she actually gave me an opportunity to speak my feeling on the issue. I really appreciate it, and I know she's a great activist, and she inspires me to keep acting. So, Nerdeen, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Ralph, for the amazing introduction. Thank you, Brooklyn for Peace, for putting on this wonderful event. Emily, for all your hard work. Remi, for that wonderful performance. Sumaya, who's also my fellow Palestinian, now on the stage sharing it, as well with the ACLU, Brian Hauss. Just thank you all around to everybody before I start. I want to start off by showing you how much of an impact BDS can actually have. When I was on campus, where I graduated from CUNY in 2016, in the spring of 2016, the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo, threatened to cut $500 million of funding to CUNY campuses, accusing Students for Justice for Palestine of being anti-Semitic because of things we promoted like BDS, because of us promoting a one-state solution and so many other things on campus. This was an attempt by the governor to sideline the issue of Palestine from the other issues that were happening at the time. As we were leading the student movement on CUNY, we were one of the leaders of the student movement at CUNY at the time, not just calling for the removal of Zionist curriculum or the end to birthright trips or a demand for BDS, but also calling for pay parity between adjuncts and professors, for $15 minimum wage for campus workers. And so they saw the power in that, and they wanted to sideline us from that. I've graduated since then, and of course, after I graduated, not during while I was on campus, while I was actually struggling with this, CUNY had to produce a legal letter, a document that all of you, it's public because CUNY is a public institution, can look up, that not only were we not implicated in anti-Semitism, but that in fact we were actually also victims of anti-Arab racism and Islamophobia. In this legal document, they even expanded on terms like the Intifada, clarifying that it doesn't mean genocide against the Jews, as Hillel or other Zionist organizations on campus attempted to misrepresent it, but rather it means uprising. So really having a legal document actually sets a precedent and creates a paper trail for us that is much more beneficial than what we could have ever hoped for, right? And this came as a result of them investigating us. I was investigated by third-party counsel hired by CUNY. My faculty advisor was investigated as well, even though she's a Jewish woman, and many other people on campus for this. However, we've graduated, like I've said, but these intimidation tactics don't stop. Just a few months ago, I got hit with this thing called the Zachar letter, which is another kind of legal document written by a Zionist firm, sent to the Attorney General of the United States, calling for us to be investigated by the US for similar things. So of course they took it from the campus level to like real life because we're adults now. But they investigated us then, and the results were better than we could plan, so bring it on. But this just goes to show how important BDS is, and how important fighting for the struggle for Palestine is, and that our actions and our efforts actually do have a big impact. Because if they couldn't, how would a student organization, I was an undergrad, a student organization on campus compel the governor of New York to cut $500 million in funding to the largest public institution in the entire country, So this work is really important. And they were scared of it when we were pushing for Palestine on campus, but now even in the community, they're hitting us with letters like this. So what are we doing in the community today to warrant this? Local work that we've been doing to progress BDS, to progress boycotts in the community within our lifetime, many of whom are in the audience today. We've been leading a Boycott Israeli Dates campaign in the community for 4 years. Even while we were students, we were doing this and continuing it now. And you guys can see this flyer that we have that we'll hand out at the end too, with all of the different brands and companies by Israeli dates that you should avoid, especially now that we're in the month of Ramadan, as many of you may know. And the dates are a really popular item, and they just sell a lot of money in Ramadan. So we do this before the beginning of every Ramadan, even throughout. We go to different business owners and talk to them about what they're selling. We actually go through their entire stock and check the labels, research everything. We keep a record of it as well in order for us to follow up. And because of this, we've actually witnessed the de-shelving of Israeli products immediately upon notification of what they have, because a lot of people, they don't want to support Israeli dates, and a lot of them it's just due to lack of information and knowledge. While some have de-shelved that, we've also been threatened by some local store owners as well, who, after talking to them, I've literally had someone tell me, oh, if you mention my store that we sell Israeli dates, you're going to see what happens to you and your group. you know? And I straight up told him, you know, how dare you threaten the only people right now who are actually like holding people accountable to this. And he felt really embarrassed and just, you know, disgraced for saying what he did. But like I said, we keep a record of this, and we've been able to witness over the past few years the decrease of Israeli dates being sold in the community. So there is support for this, and there is impact. It is effective, and this is just in like the neighborhood of Bay Ridge. We're in Brooklyn now, so I mean I can talk neighborhoods with y'all. But people can print these things and go to Atlantic Avenue, and it really just takes a few of us. We started this while in undergrad, and now we're just a bunch of like, you know, young 20-year-olds who actually were able to have this impact in our community. So this is something that I would encourage everyone to do. Not only does it, you know, bring the issue of Israeli dates and actually make a material impact, but it also reintroduces and consistently has the idea of BDS like in the community to familiarize people with it and to build that. And I also want to emphasize for everyone here that BDS is the floor, it's not the ceiling. You know, it's not the best thing that you can do for Palestinians, right? And when having conversations about BDS, we have to consistently reorient them to reflect that, in fact, divesting and boycotting things that cause harm for us, it's not necessarily, you know, like a proactive way to support Palestinians. In fact, all it does is just stop the harm, you know? And BDS is great for that. I'm not saying that it's not the best thing as in like, you know, but it's literally like divesting and taking and boycotting things that would kill us, you know? So when people say that, you can even argue that people who claim to be neutral should be inherently supportive of BDS, because right now, the US, every single taxpayer contributes the $10 million a day that we fund Israel with. So if you actually want to be truly neutral, we have to cut that aid off. We have to cut that funding off. You know, and so many things when it comes to supporting Palestinians has been criminalized or legalized in the US. Meanwhile, people can send donations to settlements and have that written off as tax deductible. So in order to be truly neutral, the least we can do is BDS. BDS is the least that we can do for Palestinians, not the most, because all it does is, you know, limit the harm, take away the harm. It doesn't, you know, you're not giving us money, you're not giving us anything, you're just taking away that harm. And that we must expand our scope and understanding of BDS locally in the communities and in arenas that it isn't used in. So, you know, yes to divestment on campuses, but how do we expand this to hold local politicians accountable for their racism and anti-Palestinian actions and statements, you know? And we've seen this with recently Kalman Yeager tweeting that Palestinians don't exist, and even in Bay Ridge, Justin Brennan issuing a statement against BDS. We can use BDS because now it has become part of the larger political conversation, and it's, you know, we've seen the effects of especially Ilhan Omar making this really a national dialogue. We can use BDS as a litmus test to know where local politicians stand on the issue of Palestine and how they will relate to their local Palestinian community and their susceptibility to Zionist lobbying and demands, so that we can educate them about this, or educate our communities that voted them in or didn't vote them in or could vote them out about this as well, right? And I think that's a very effective way that BDS, to use BDS and to expand the scope of BDS, not just through divestment, but because, you know, politicians are talking about it, they have their statements on it, they have their opinions on it, we can hold them accountable to it. And ultimately, we have to understand that BDS must be part of a larger anti-colonial framework. Otherwise, we risk setting the scene for a movement that puts conditions on solidarity with Palestine. We can't only uplift, you know, nonviolent tactics in the movement, because then we can, by doing that, we may marginalize the right for Palestinians to defend themselves by any means that they see necessary. BDS is one of those means, but so is the Great Return March, for example. And, you know, many of the things that have been happening as part of the Great Return March. So we've been able to include both in our work, and that needs to be the standard, you know. So when we promote BDS, it's not only BDS. You have to put it as part of the larger struggle and solidarity with Palestine, and understand that while BDS is a form of resistance, we have to support all forms of Palestinian resistance if we say that we support Palestine and Palestinians. And right now, at the end of the day, the US is an unneutral broker between Palestine and Israel. We see this with the deal of the century and the ridiculous you know, things that they're coming up with every day. I think really just trying to gauge our reaction and our opinion on it. And we see that this is a sad last-ditch attempt as the world public opinion rapidly shifts on Israel, rapidly declining. I mean, you know, like Sumaya mentioned before me, you would have never thought someone like at NYU would have, you know, in his commencement speech, shout out SJP, or even have Han Omar bringing it to the national dialogue and conversation. So, you know, as this happens, whatever we add to it with our support of BDS and Palestine can really be a part of the domino effect and change, because we see it happening so fast. And being in New York, being in a place where, you know, we're not, me as a Palestinian, I can speak out here much more than my fellow Palestinians and family members can back home, and being in a city with so much Zionist institutions and Zionist propaganda and lobbying and money, I think our impact here will really make a big difference. So I just wanted to leave you all with those messages today for why, you know, how to understand how we can be a part of BDS, and why it's important to promote it in our work, and how we can be part of, you know, decolonizing and promoting human rights, justice, liberty, equality, self-determination for all Palestinian people. Thank you.
Get out there and lead us men. And I'll be right behind you, ready to do anything you want to do. Because I believe in all that you do. Our next speaker is a staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, where he focuses on free speech. He focuses on free speech. He has litigated cases involving boycotts, defamation, political advertising, union organizing, government retaliation, and speech crimes. While he is from Los Angeles and still lost, he is our gift. And I want to introduce Brian Hauss.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for having me here tonight, and thank you so much to Emily for inviting me to this event. I'm a staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union. We're a domestic civil rights and civil liberties organization. We've been in existence for about 100 years. And you know, we don't take a position on boycotts of foreign countries generally, but we have long defended the First Amendment right to boycott. And that's a right that's increasingly under